We're going to begin in just about a minute. Welcome to those that are watching now. Well, it's 10 o'clock now, so let's begin. Today we're going to begin to look at the third gospel narrative of the Incarnation. But before we do, I just wanted to recap a little bit on the previous two. You see, each of the Incarnation narratives that we've looked at so far tells you in short form what it is that the whole gospel that evangelist has written is going to tell you. In Mark, throughout, we are going to hear about this pitched struggle between the empire, the way things are in our world, and the kingdom, the way that God would have things be in our world. In Matthew, we are constantly going to be challenged to see the universality of God's love. We've heard it in several places in the Incarnation narrative, and we're going to hear it again throughout Matthew's Gospel. Of course, Matthew wants us to see that all of the religious certainties are killing certainties. They keep the overly religious folks from being able to see where God is moving in new ways and new places. And so throughout Matthew, you're going to see a religious structure that just doesn't get it, that never sees God's hand at work, and foreigners and outcasts being treated to seeing God's grace and God's love for them. It's only in Matthew that when the Sanhedrin has voted to have Jesus executed, Simon the Cyrene takes up Jesus' cross. Dismas, the good thief, is promised a place in glory. And the Roman centurion at the base of the cross looks up and says, "Surely this is the Son of God." That is the overarching narrative of Matthew's Gospel, that God's love will not be held in, boxed in by our bigotry and bias. God's love is for all. So now we turn to Luke. And likewise, Luke's Incarnation narrative is going to point us in the direction of what we need to hear from Luke's perspective about who Jesus is and was. And to start with that, today I want to talk about Luke's meta story. You see, Luke was a very skillful storyteller, an incredibly good teacher. And one of the things that Luke employs throughout his gospel are what I call Lucan sandwiches. Luke will take two stories with remarkably similar details, place them close together, and then in the middle put in a great teaching narrative that helps us to understand what Luke wants us to see about those two great narratives. But Luke's whole gospel is built into one enormous sandwich. I'll never forget 1997 when I led my first pilgrimage group through the Holy Land. There was something there that came as a bit of a shock to me on the day we got to Bethlehem. We had lunch in the square across from the Church of the Nativity and then headed across to the church, this enormous stone edifice. I had grown used to what we would see inside. After the church in Nazareth, we walked inside and there was a great hole in the floor through which you could see the foundation of the home of St. Mary the Virgin. I expected the same here, but that wasn't what I got. The group walked up the center of the nave. We went off to a side chapel at the front of the nave, and through that chapel we walked the length of the chancel. And where the sanctuary would be, there was a stairwell going down. We were led down that stairwell into the stable, the grotto of the Nativity. all those years, I had been lulled into believing in a tiny wooden stable like the creche that we set up every Christmas. Never once did I think, in a desert economy, who could afford to use wood that was so scarce to build a place for animals? Wood was for the homes and the palaces of the rich. The ordinary folks had animals stabled in what they had available to them, which were caves. The next part of that shock was to see the manger. And again, my mind conjured up that lovely little wooden X-frame feed trough that we find in almost every creche scene. It wasn't there. Instead, just as I had seen up on Mount Megiddo, it was a large stone with a trough chipped out of it. The reason that struck me as so important was that Luke begins his gospel with Jesus laid out on a stone in a cave. And 20-some chapters later, Luke is going to set us up with a story of Jesus laid out on a stone in a cave in Jerusalem. And if that were the totality of Luke's gospel, its message would be clear. Life's a bitch and then you die. But the other thing about Luke's sandwiches is that Luke so often leaves a little piece that doesn't quite fit into the sandwich. And when Luke does that, the important message for us is pay attention to that piece, because it's the most important piece of all. And in Luke's meta story, the part that is left hanging out of the sandwich is the resurrection. And so Luke's story becomes life's a bitch, but then you die. But wait, there's more. What Luke wants us to hear in his overarching structure of his gospel is that this story, this Jesus, is going to be about life, about new life, about hope that can transcend even death. The large picture, image of Jesus Christ for Luke is the picture of resurrection. It seems odd as we prepare for the birth of Jesus in time that the story should point us to the end. And yet for Luke, the end is the most important part of all. Well, thank you for joining me for this talk this morning, our 6th of 10. I will be back again on Wednesday at 10 a.m. And on Wednesday, we're going to take a look at the aspect of the shepherds, which is something that only Luke adds to his story. I hope that you're still enjoying a wonderful and holy Advent season of preparing for the birth in your life, the rebirth of Jesus Christ. I hope that you have a blessed Advent, and I hope to see you again on Wednesday. God bless.